Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Discussing New Approaches in AI, Data and Technology. I'm your host, Eric Walker-Rawson, founder of Talos, and today we've got a very special guest in, what is really royalty for Discussing New Approaches. Dr. Simon Wallace is joining me in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Who was actually our first ever, or my first ever guest that I brought on. And that was pre-studio, that was online interviews, if you can remember.
You've upgraded since the first time.
Yes, it's a lot nicer. Much better than sort of the dank meeting room, I think, that I had the first conversation with you in.
And I was sitting with my pop arty background in the back and trying to stop the dog from jumping up on me whilst we were recording,
All of the fun of recording at home. But today we've got a very interesting topic. Obviously, a lot's changed since we had that last conversation. You are now the co-founder and the CTO of Suffrago. So we can get a little bit into that. But I want to jump into the first question straight away because I think it's a big one. It's a big topic we're discovering today. Obviously, polling is what we're going to discuss. It's sort of everywhere at the moment. I mean, it's become a very large point of political discourse. Of you can't go 5 seconds without polls being mentioned in some sort of way. But not everyone trusts them. So the first question I want to throw your way is, why is modern polling broken?
Yeah, it's definitely a big one. I think it's because fundamentally we're using old methodology in a new AI, very connected era and expecting the same thing to be as it was. When we look back at polling, it used to be people in a call center ringing people up on the phone and saying, "Hi, I'm from insert poll company name here. We'd like to spend 10 minutes doing this." And that was based upon a whole bunch of theory and an application. And all in all, now all we've done is replace people calling with an online panel. And too often with that panel, what ends up happening is it becomes stale. It doesn't get refreshed, or it becomes difficult, or people drop out of it. And that's the nature of polling. But what's happening more, and we're seeing it more and more, especially with the change in the political landscape, is people aren't trusting the traditional polling companies anymore. We go back and look at the election in America. By surprise, took all the polls away. Well, actually, I think what happened more than anything was the people who were voting weren't part of that polling sample. And not to get too far into polling theory, but the whole aspect is that you can pick a random sample of population, about 1,000 to 1,500 people, around the top end, if you believe that you've got a fair distribution of everybody in the population. And the trick in polling is to identify when you've caught enough of the distinct variables between individuals. So by that, it's is it gender, age, income, the amount of children they have, what type of schools their children go to. So we can go down into real minutiae. But if we go, okay, we have to get 5 people from each of that group, your poll size could be 2.5 million. It could be way too big to be reasonable. And what a lot of pollsters do is go, okay, we'll base our poll on these 5 or 6 demographic features. And if we get an even number from there, what we can do is then weight the responses to correct for over-representation, under-representation, and then that will give us a rough estimation.
So what will that weighting mean when you say weighting?
It means that, so we have fewer males aged 18 to 34. So that response will be counted 1.5 times in the calculation. Or it's weird how it happens with 1.5 responses, but it gets calculated as a weighted average, and there's different ways of doing it, but roughly it means that 1.5 times, or we've got too many women over the age of 40, so we'll decrease the importance of each of those votes, so each vote will be counted half a time. So what you end up with then is you're weighting, bringing the peaks and troughs of what your sample looks like into the representation of the population you're trying to estimate.
So is it almost like how in America you have some states where votes are worth more than others in their sort of voting system because that state, they have to weigh it equally almost?
Kind of. It's more akin to the point of we've asked too many people, right? We've asked too many people of this type, what do you think? And if we keep it that way, our poll is dominated by this. And that's something where I think it goes back to that old methodology. We've been told having a biased sample is bad. Is it? Is it the point of actually, if you know what people are saying in this sample, well, you might be able to understand more about what's being said. And understanding what people are saying and why they may be saying it, I think is more crucial than going, oh, we must make this predict the national population. And we saw in Donald Trump's election, if you don't have that, and go to the waiting point, if you don't have that sample or that subset of the sample in your overall methodology, overall sample, you can't predict what they're going to say. You can't weight 0 to be important. So that whole point of, are people not trusting polls? Are people not trusting the overall selection? Are we not choosing the right number of people? I think it all boils down to, if we look at the starting point, which is old dial-a-phone traditional polling, have we really evolved that much since then? Or have we just gone, oh, let's move it online. And now we're online, let's move it to this. And I think the real challenge that we face is when people are constantly bombarded with information in the age of TikTok and Instagram, are you then dealing with the fact of, hey, I'd like you to take 20 minutes to fill out this survey for me or fill out this poll for me, and we're going to give you a fraction of a penny, and it might just be hidden away and no one's ever going to see it. When people are wanting to make sure they're being heard and wanting their voice to be heard, how do you make it so people think, okay, I'm doing this for a reason, or I'm doing it so I'm going to be heard by people I want to be heard by?
It's almost tracking the data of that. So if you're providing your opinion, providing your data to this, you almost want to know where it ends up, how it's used.
I think as well, there's this aspect when you look at the online discourse, it's all about essentially almost winning points, right? Showing to a cohort, well, okay, I'm saying the thing that I should be saying, and I'm saying this because I know that's how I have to say it because my name's attached to it. And I think that's where anonymity is sometimes used as a force for quote-unquote evil, abuse. But if you use anonymity in the right way, you can actually get real, meaningful discussions. The joke we said when we set up Suffrago was we had, still have actually, a Tory staffer who works with us. And he could never say, actually, I think Keir Starmer's done quite a good job on this one. He could never say it, right? But what we went and designed with Suffrago is he might actually think that. So can we use anonymity for good in a way that enables people to express their real and true opinion? And I think too often with polling as well, we get stuck into this mindset of, I'm going to ask you 20 questions that I want to know. And there's this little box down at the bottom, this open-ended response box. What else would you like to tell us? Do you have anything else you'd like us to know? And having worked in sampling and polling and market research, too often we go, word cloud, ta-da, or sentiment analysis, ta-da. We use it as a afterthought, not actually that point of, that's the one box in any survey when people actually tell you what's on their mind. So how can you harness that into be something where you can then go, okay, so this should be the main thing, what they're saying, and then the other stuff can support it in terms of, yes, and they feel that. So I think to go back to your question of why is modern polling broken, I think it's because it hasn't evolved. I think because we're doing the same thing, not to quote Einstein too early in a podcast, but we are following Einstein's definition of stupidity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We've seen that polling fails due to sampling errors, but we're still going, okay, let's make sure we sample and weight everything properly. Instead of going and looking at what you can get out from the data and the value you can bring from that data. And it doesn't need to always be national. Could it be local? And it brings up questions which aren't asked, I don't think, enough. To go, okay, how can we make this reflect the world we are in, which is different than 70 years ago? To be, okay, how can we make it so not just heard by MPs, not just heard by decision makers, but when I say heard, I mean, if you run a conversation on Suffrago, you want to hear what people are saying. And heard in that way is more the fact that you're able to see what people are saying, understand it, and act upon it. And at the moment, too often, we're bombarded with so many pieces of information. The online conversation is not one-to-one. It's thousands to one, dozens to one, hundreds to one.
It's almost like you imagine an amphitheatre or a stage or a crowded room and everyone shouting, and how do you pick out the important bits of information? So if you're a policymaker, a decision maker, how do you listen to the people who aren't just the loudest in the room, but the people who you can get a fair demographic of what people actually want?
But also as well, you use the amphitheatre analogy. It's weird though, because it is that. But each person in that amphitheatre doesn't think those other people are there.
It's almost like in individual boxes.
Yes.
Sort of like all
it's like,
shouting.
I'm talking to you, Eric. You should be listening to me. And you're trying to say, well, I've got 100 other people. I don't care. I'm talking to you. Listen to me.
Mm.
And that's what the modern internet has essentially become. So how do you then make it so people feel represented, heard, when you have hundreds and thousands of voices all speaking to you at once? And I think if we can start solving that dichotomy and start looking at, okay, if we know this isn't working as it stands, what can we do better to try to make it more possible and more accessible and almost more democratized so anyone can actually understand and hear what people are wanting to tell them?
Again, I like the democratized element of that. I want to bring it back slightly. So you mentioned sort of anonymization being used for good and for evil. And I think that also ties into the idea that people don't trust polls anymore. I mean, if you look at any sort of statistic taken from a Gov poll, whatever political side of the fence you're leaning on, left, right, red, blue, purple, whatever you might think, people don't tend to trust those polls, especially if it doesn't align with their ideology, or I suppose people are coining the phrase narrative now. But more than that, I think it leads to people just not trusting the polls in general, more so than it not aligning to what they think. It's that deep trust. So I suppose breaking that down a little bit, if I was in a position of power and I wanted to do something, perhaps something that people didn't agree with in a majority, and you might even know that. So let's say for nefarious purposes, could I use or set up a poll to show that, therefore swaying public opinion in some way? Can I, skew the metrics? Are there different ways in which you can achieve an outcome that you already want?
Yes.
In a short answer.
Yes, 100%. It comes down to the experimental design and what you choose to do. There's a brilliant Yes Minister sketch about ties. And I'm not going to quote it because I'd get it wrong, but let's use the same kind of methodology. Nate Silver showed it years ago with 538. Depending upon the panel you use, there are some panels which have more political views, have more of one, more of another. So that starts off with, right, what panel are you going to ask? And
what are these panels? So how is a panel chosen, for example?
Sometimes it's closed, where you have to be invited. Sometimes it's open, where you can go and say, hey, I want to be part of this.
Is it like juries?
In a way, more often than not, one of the major national pollers in the UK has the point of, hey, sign up and we'll give you X for answering a survey. Whereas like a 10-minute survey and a couple of pence, like it's not a great return, not returning you time. But sometimes what happens is when you're going through it, you'll be asked a bunch of screening questions. And if you don't pass the quota, or the quota's been filled, or you don't match the people they want to ask in this situation, then they'll go, okay, thanks very much for your time. You've not been selected for this survey. So you've got the panel itself, the pool itself could be more biased than another. If you look at any, like 538 is a great example of this, you can see how they correct for existing polls, in America especially. Then you can set screening questions to restrict who you're going to ask, who you want to be able to see. Now, sometimes they're very useful, right? Because if you're asking a question about motherhood and it's purely about experiences in motherhood, you're not going to want to hear from men. If it's parenthood, then yes, you would ask both male and female viewpoints. But if it's purely a motherhood situation, you're going to want a screening question to make sure you're getting the right responses.
Makes sense.
So you can do that. Then there is the contextual screening of the question. So sometimes in the more traditional survey and panels, you can have several pages of text you have to read or a piece of information where it can say, did you know that people holding cue cards are 85% more likely to commit a crime on public transport? Right? And that's the point. And then the next question is going to be, so do you think people should be able to hold cue cards in the UK? So you can phrase it out that way. Now that is if you're wanting to be purely malicious about the activity. But you ask the question, can it be done? Yes, it can be done. And I think more often than not, it isn't done that way. But you can't necessarily always tell because the survey questions aren't available with the responses. right? The survey questions are something which you answered 6 months ago, or are hidden behind the screen, or you might not necessarily always see. So you can only see the results, not what was asked. And I think for real transparency, you need to have the two of those connected, which is something that we've done on Suffrago, where you have what we call the conversation. The conversation has that context bit, has the statement you're voting on, but has the results underneath, depending upon the settings chosen by the forum owner. But most times, 9 times out of 10, it'll have the results directly underneath, because the point is you want that discussion, you want that debate, and the live results enable it, right? Because if you're against the idea and you're seeing the poll is going really positively on Suffrago, you're going to get all your friends to come on and vote on Suffrago to say, no, we need to make sure this doesn't, because this is going to be publicized and used. We need to make our voice heard to counteract what we're seeing there. But having the conversation up top, having the context up top below the results, makes it clear of this is what was asked and this was the result. So that helps with that transparency point of you're not just doing something which is designed to get the answer you want. And it becomes easy to see that situation too.
Amazing. Okay, so again, bringing it back slightly, I think another surprising element of this is how big these sample sizes are. So you mentioned 1,500 people. Is that the average?
1,000 to 1,500, yeah.
So that seems quite small. I mean, obviously with the almost the sort of analog to digital switch, did that massively increase, or was it the same amount of people that were being called up back in the day?
For my time, but I imagine it was probably the same. Because where that comes from is a statistical theory. And in essence, not to dive too far down into statistical theory and p-values and significance levels and all that, if you had a die and you didn't know how many faces were on the die, is it a d6, a d20, and you started throwing the dice and you saw the results that you were seeing over and over and over again, after a certain number of times, you go, that's a 1, that's a 2, that's a 5, that's a 6. After a while, you'd realize, I'm not seeing 7, 8, 9, or 10. So actually, I don't need to keep rolling this a million times to know that this is a 6-sided die, because all I'm seeing are these 6 responses. Right? I'm only seeing these 6 values. So you don't need to run it as many times as there are people in the UK, right? You know that, okay, roughly, now I'm seeing enough to know that happens. And if you imagine a survey or a question, you'll start seeing that the more responses you have, it changes it gradually. So you need more and more responses to change that value in a different direction. Overall, that theory then applies to be, if you have enough of those groups that we talked about, which is a full representation of the UK, you don't have to ask every single person in that group. You have to ask enough of them that you're starting to get the distinct differences in opinion. So let's say everyone in the UK can be split down into groups of 100,000, right? 65 million people in the UK. You don't need to ask all 100,000 of each of those groups. You could ask 100, 200, and then go, okay, good enough, right? We're there. But that 1,500 comes from that point of, if everyone in the UK, if everyone in any population is of equal mind, of equal thought, we can pick 1,500 people because every single person in that pool has an equal chance of being selected. And if we do that, then this poll will reflect the UK population plus or minus a margin of error. The problem is, like we said at the beginning and like we've been talking about now, that's not the case. And that selected aspect is always a difficult one too. Because if we go back to, like I say, before my time, but if we go back to the phone surveys, I've got everyone in the UK in a phone book. I can call every single number. Well, everyone has an equal chance of being selected, right? Selected in this term means selected and complete. Because the theory is usually given the example of a bag of balls, but I'll use the dice analogy, right, which I used before. Every one of those faces on that die has an equal chance of showing up, right, because it's 1 in 6, or has a chance of showing up. If you've got a panel, that's not everyone having an equal chance of being selected. So it gets into weird theory and gets into this whole point of enough hasn't been done in this area of research, and I wish more was. But when we go back to the core tenets of the theory, and we look at the whole concept of stratified random sampling, that's what those groups are, they're called strata. When we go into stratified random sampling, you kind of have to go back and look and go, if we're getting this so badly wrong, maybe our stratas are wrong. Maybe our grouping is wrong. Maybe we need to increase the grouping, decrease the grouping. But the problem you have is panels and panel provider companies make their money based upon the number of responses. Not all the time, and there's different commercial models to absolve myself of any liability, but on a rule of thumb, a lot of them make money pay per response. So if you pay per response, you're going to go, I'll just take 1,500 because I don't want to ask more. And you never know if more is going to be beneficial. Law of diminishing returns. After a while, the conversation will stay roughly the same unless you ask new people and you have to get an equal number of new people, whole thing. But if you get, and it is the old saw, you get what you measure. If you are saying people you pay per response, they're not going to open up that conversation. Because if you imagine a company comes along and says, we're going to give you the tool that enables you to ask any question to any person across the entirety of the world, anyone. Open tool, we're giving the market research tools to you, but by the way, Eric, you're going to pay per response.
You'd limit it.
You're going to freak out.
Yeah.
Slightly nerdy joke, it's like your AWS bill. You're always panicked about it, right? Because you can spend millions in a blink of an eye without realizing it. That's what the current thinking is. So with Suffrago, where we have done that, we have made essentially the market research methodology and tools available without the lag, so the results are instantaneous. The open-ended analysis gets done within hours after the conversation completes rather than days or weeks. But what we do is we say, look, we are not a panel provider. We are a tool provider. If you want to hear the voice of the people, 100% we're on board for that. You can get as many responses as you want. You can set up the restrictions you want that we spoke about. You can have all the control that you want for a monthly fee. Different features, different things, and we will charge you for how long the conversation runs, not how many people you get. Because our thinking is, if we do that, well, we no longer get what we measure. We can get that point of more responses. Like I said, more responses isn't always good, but I think it can help build that trust. Because we live in bubbles, right? So if you and I were in a pub and I said to you, Eric, you go, I don't believe it. Have you been asked a question? And you say no. Then you go to your mate, have you been asked it? No, and I mentioned it. We had this conversation last week, and none of the guys I know have been asked it. So you're going to sit there and go, God, out of that 10 friendship group, no one's been asked that poll.
And on a personal note, I don't know anyone who's been involved in these polls. Maybe people can drop a comment. It'd be a really good survey.
Do you know what? We'll run a conversation on Suffrago for it. We'll stick it in the link, have it underneath, and anyone can say, yes, I have, no, I haven't, and we'll see what the numbers come out as.
So I think that's a good segue into what is Suffrago. So, I mean, obviously that we sort of define the problem, basically, with all of the things that we just talked about. So what is the solution that you're presenting with Suffrago?
What we've tried to build, and I think been successful in, is what we view as the next generation of market research and polling, where it is that aspect of we give the tools to individuals who want to be heard. We give the ability for people to host a conversation, build a forum, build a group, build a community where they can ask the conversation to be able to do it. But at the same time, make sure that there's that mechanism to then distribute the results. So Suffrago has 3 core offerings inside of it.
So it's a platform.
It's a platform. Yeah. Platform, suffrago.org. Anyone can sign up. It's free for people to sign up, free to express your voice. There's a whole bunch of anonymity stuff, which I'm sure we'll dive into. But there's forums, which are groups, conversations, which are debates, polls, and bulletins, which are more medium form update content. And what we do as a platform is we both help people run the conversations and the bulletins, and we use our own mechanisms to help raise attention to it. We have a network of what we call local democracy reporters, who are individuals across the UK who are active on TikTok, raising awareness to points, saying, hey, look, if this is something important to you, come on Suffrago, express your viewpoint. Did you know that Glasgow has this problem? Conversation now live on Suffrago, tell us what you think. Then they take those results and go, did you know that 20% people thought that? So helping that distribution mechanism, because obviously a lot of the way in which we absorb local news, national news has changed. We're wanting to help have that connection to distribute the results easily.
How has that changed? Just have interest in, very briefly.
Very briefly. It's a model that, again, talk about not evolved. I'm not a journalist, but we all know that local press is really struggling. You know, when was the last time you read a local newspaper?
Probably the only the one that I've read recently is the free one. So like the Metro thing that you get, and that's because it's there and it's in a convenient space.
But then funny story, Metro's national.
Yeah, Metro's national as well, yeah.
The thing is, like, in the local papers that come through, they used to be the primary source of news. And then the internet came along. The internet's killed more local newspapers than anything else. And now you see the local newspapers are struggling and they're trying to gain content. A lot of them gone subscription models. And some of their content as well is what used to fill up the pages of a local newspaper is now a lot of the content that's there. And what we also hope Suffrago can do, is help those local outlets. Because we have information. They could run a conversation. And it's a great example, actually. We helped a local community group in Harrogate run a conversation because they had the company that was for the development in Rotary Woods ran a poll which had...
So they wanted to take down the woods or...
They wanted to remove part of it to expand their bottling facility.
Okay.
They ran a poll of 200 people, which said 78% of Harrogate residents are overwhelmingly in favour of this, the silent majority. And cleverly, they released it a week before the planning application meeting. So, historically, not a chance in hell of countering that narrative. What we did was we spoke with them and said, look, let's get the poll live in Suffrago. And it was distributed, it was sent to a whole bunch of people, pro, con, and within 5 minutes of them talking to us, the conversation was live. Within 2 days, they received 997 responses, and they had something which the MP was able to go and say, promote in his newsletter and go, we have evidence that this isn't the case. They were able to go back to that company and say, hang on, I want more information about how you did this, to say, like, what's going on. And again, you got this issue of 200, 997. The sampling size problem is always going to be a thing, right? But it gave the ability for that local community to counter a narrative, to build that own information, and gave the MP that ability to do stuff.
Again, a tool, like you're saying, for MPs, for local... Because I suppose there's always a difference between local problems and national problems.
Yeah. And that story was picked up by the local newspaper, the local news. It was a good story, which they wouldn't have had the information for to be able to publish if it wasn't for that. So Suffrago can also, in our mind, help with that local news challenge of giving that information, because what people think about locally and nationally is different. And I think that's something that a lot of existing polling doesn't quite think. It's like everyone thinks at a national level. Well, do they? Or are some people just like, I don't care about... I mean, we live in London or near London in the southeast. If you... Where I grew up in Sheffield, they very rarely care about what's going on in London, right? So this national versus local mindset, I think, is something we need to address more too.
And I suppose, is there a mixing of the two? So people talking about local problems or what they're seeing as local problems on a national scale. So I suppose, will this... You know, if someone up from Sheffield or anywhere else, you know, who's outside of that London sphere, but is talking on a social media platform that has full national reach, global reach in a lot of cases, and is commenting on, you know, the mayor of London's post saying, well, I'm seeing this where I am, which is really a local problem because it's first-hand experience, it's what they're seeing, but they're, you know, conflating it with national problems, which are, you know, a little bit different. You know, I suppose all of the local problems equate to the national problems, but the local problem isn't the national problem, if I'm understanding that correctly.
And also in your question, you highlight something really important. The mayor of London's only the mayor of London. No one from London's commenting on the mayor of Sheffield. Well, they only have a Lord Mayor, I believe, but they're not commenting on Andy Burnham, right? I mean, bad example because they are. But the fact is, the local aspect has become national almost. And I think it's important that we don't get bogged down in that aspect where it's like, oh, if it's not this, it's not important, or we need to only think about it in this lens. I think more importantly, I think that's part of the problem with polling is it's only, does it have a national reach, does it have a national interest? But there are situations and places where if you're having a dozens to one conversation, if we had another person in this room talking to us whilst we were doing this, I'd struggle to understand you, you'd struggle to understand me because we have a separate second voice in the room. That's where Suffrago is designed to help, right? If you have 10 people talking at once, you're not going to understand them. It's impossible or very difficult. You'll hear one voice, one word, maybe here and there. But what we want to be able to do is give that ability for somebody to decide what's important to them. If you can share it, if you can vote on it, if you can vote anonymously, if you can vote without fear that it's going to impact you in any way, if you can do that, and which is why Suffrago, we've made anonymity that voice for good rather than that voice for abuse. If you can do that, then anyone can go, okay. So it is the fact that the local town hall does have a water problem, but nobody said it because they're intimidated by the chair of the local parish council, or something like that. That's what Suffrago is designed for, is to enable any of those conversations to happen.
And how do you ensure that anonymity? I suppose also accuracy as well, because it needs to be accurate. It needs to be neutral, as well, which you were just talking about, and you need to protect that anonymity. So how does that work? I suppose almost from a tech perspective.
Anonymity is difficult to do online. So first and foremost, we have no cookies. We don't have any cookies on our platform. We don't use any cross-marketing. We don't use any tracking of that sort. When you sign into Suffrago, we encourage you to create your persona, those demographics we were talking about. When you vote, all we track is the fact of, hey, Eric has voted on this conversation. What we then do is take all the information you provided us, entirely optionally, and we attach that to your voting record. And if and we talk about those strata, those groups, when we're analysing it, if there's less than 10 of that group, we don't show the result. So it makes it so, as much as possible, what you say what you vote isn't tied against what you have actually voted against. So your email is not tied to that, but your demographics is what people care about is. The only bit where and anonymity as well, and this is a weird thing, we are saying to a certain extent, you do have to trust that we are not going to be evil. The only bit where your personal identity, your email address, is tied to what you say on Suffrago is when you submit a comment or a statement. The only reason for that is our initial creation, we were very much focused as being an MP-focused tool, or helping MPs understand the voice of what their constituents were saying. And what we do is we have a flagging algorithm, which goes through and says, is this advocating violence? Is this advocating for harm? Is this advocating something illegal? And if any of those get flagged, we need to know who it is, because what we don't want to see is a Sir David Armes or a Joe Cox situation, where it was like, they were on Facebook spouting all this, and we don't want that to happen with Suffrago. So if it does happen, it gets flagged. And we do have our Political Neutrality Council to review that with us and go, right, do we need to take action? But the point is, that's in the back end, nobody on Suffrago will ever see what you say. You submit a comment, it is hidden from everyone. The forum owner, the owner of the conversation, doesn't see that conversation. They see the analysis of that statement. They see the analysis of all the statements. So what you say will never be shown to another individual, which we hope brings that anonymity point of they're not going to say things to score points. Because no one knows that they said, yes, good person, you have said the party line. No, it's what you actually think and what you actually believe. And that's how we balance that anonymity. There are times as well where you can vote on Suffrago without being signed in. That's an option for people creating conversations. The only thing that happens then is we do have to flash up everyone's favorite thing, a cookie banner to be, hey, we're storing it on your device. But that's all that's being stored just to make sure people aren't spamming and voting over and over and over again as much.
And that's locally, not on your system as well. So it's different.
I think there's one point quickly, aware of our time, that is really important to say. You said it has to be neutral. I don't agree with that. It can be, and our goal should be neutrality.
Does it depend on the question?
It depends on the question, depends upon who's answering. But that's the mindset of, oh, it doesn't reflect the UK, we can't analyse this. But if you are getting 100 people talking about something that's important to them, and you go, okay, they're all of this party political persuasion, well, that's still valuable, because now you know what that 100 people of that party political persuasion are talking about. I think too often, in this quest for national representation, we ignore the point of anybody telling you something is valuable. Yes, it's not as valuable as if you have a whole bunch of information, but you didn't have it before. And what we want to do is make it easy and actionable. So if you are of the opposite political persuasion, well, now you know what they're saying, so you can think about and understand it. And that's the important bit where we need to get out of this mindset of nat rep or bust. It's what can we do with the information we have is more important than it has to be this way because I got told by the guy before me, by the guy before me, by the journalist before him that it has to be 1,500 to be representative. 1,500 is a number. It isn't like the way in which 1,500 comes about is theoretical in its application. I can give you 1,500 people, which isn't that rare. But because it's 1,500, tick, goes on the national news. Local coverage, 200, 300 is probably more than enough. But if we go back to that Harrogate example, we have 997 people who responded in this conversation. 87% we know from the sign-ins were verified users. 14% of them were signed in. But the point is, we know that that's 997 people expressing their viewpoint in a constituency of 100,000.
Yeah.
That 997 of 100,000 is a higher proportion than 997 over 65 million. But that was because we enabled them to raise their voice.
So it almost seems like this is a step forward with how it's approaching. I suppose in the last couple of minutes we have left, what's the future? What do you see as because obviously it seems like this is a step in the right direction, but there could be more that could be done with this.
Yeah. Honestly, we don't know what the end goal is, but we're taking the academic methodology of, do you know what? Let's try it. Let's figure out. Let's explore. Let's try new things. Let's look at something which everyone. I'm not saying something new. The soundbite from this podcast isn't going to be, person says polling's broken. This isn't new, right? It's something everyone has been saying, not everyone, but a lot of people have been saying. And what we are trying to look at in a grandiose way, how do we fix it? What's polling 2.0? What we're looking at now is having national plus local. So we're trying it with the UK because we know national polling doesn't work, but it doesn't work. Isn't as effective with first past the post. We are also trying it inside of India, Australia, Canada is another market we're kind of going into. But the platform of Suffrago is global. It works for any English-speaking country or country with English speakers, and we're looking at making it multinational very shortly. But it's that national plus local. So we have the national questions. Who have you heard the most about? Has the national coverage going to change your viewpoint? Is there anything that's on your mind? Who's the party that best aligns with your local affiliation? And then locally, because we do have the 650 constituency forums, which Suffrago owns and pays for, and we give access to any MP. And small thing, if there's any MP who watches this and wants access to their local forum, reach out to us, we'll give you access, because it's important that you hear what people are saying. But what we have in those forums is questions about, are you going to vote for the representative or do you vote for the party? The things which aren't being asked. Because we're hearing a lot about one party at the moment. That doesn't mean I'm going to vote for them. The national polls is, would you vote for this party? Or words to that effect. And they're saying yes. But that we don't have a PR system. That 45% of people does not distribute the 45% of votes. So it is, have you voted before? Are you going to vote? If there was an election tomorrow, would you vote for the party or the candidate? What would you like your council to know? Things like that. So bringing in that local polling as well as national polling. So we're getting an understanding of what the situation is at national level, but also at a local level too.
And they could also solve those problems both locally and then also nationally, so other parties could take heed of what the actual problems are and solve them, rather than just, you're not this party, so I'm not going to vote for you.
But the point is as well that if there's a local leader of a council or a local leader of an opposition party wants access to the forums, we'll give them access too. Because it's the point of, we want people in power to be able to hear it. But our tagline at Suffrago is, your voice is heard. And it's not just about, hey, I spoke on this and it got national coverage. Hey, I spoke on this and the MP heard it. It's more the fact of, the heard is the person who's run that conversation is able to see what you said and understand it, because it's been able to take 10,000 conversations, the open-ended analysis dream, which I would have dreamt about when I was doing this a long time ago, where it actually takes that and makes it actionable, not just something we go, this is really cool, word cloud. It's now something you can act upon. So the herd is, we make that information accessible, understandable, and actionable, as well as being in the realm of those decision makers. It's anyone. We want to make what people are wanting to say heard to all.
Amazing. And I could talk about this for a long time, to be honest. There's not enough time to talk about this sort of weighty topic. But if anyone else wants to, follow along your journey, it's really interesting. I'll put a link to Suffrago in the description of this video.
Also do that conversation about, have you ever been asked a poll?
Yes. Yeah, I'd love to hear people's comments about that in the comment section below. You can also, I'll put the link to Suffrago in the description, and also maybe the link to that specific poll on Suffrago as well, so you can go check it out and have a look there. You can also follow Simon on LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn as well if you want. But that's all we have time for now. If you have any more questions around Suffrago about any of this, again, put more in the comments. We'll get back to you. We can even do a follow-up maybe later on, going through some of those questions. But goodbye for now.
Dallas.